Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer Ferretti, and it's such an honor to be the 2020 DigiPres keynote speaker. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm really excited to present to you what's behind the curtain, the performance of digital stewardship, and the need for real leadership. Thank you so much to all who are joining us live and anyone watching beyond this day. I want to acknowledge that I'm on the unceded land of the Piscataway and Nanticoke peoples, known as Baltimore, Maryland. I encourage you to go to the website on the slide, native-land.ca, to learn about whose land you're inhabiting. I'm here with you as a digital initiatives librarian at the Maryland Institute College of Art, also called MICA, which is an art and design college with both undergraduate and graduate programs. As a recent National Digital Stewardship Art Program host and mentor, which I'll now refer to as NDSA Art, and the founder and principal of We Here LLC, which is both a business and a private community for people who identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color who work in libraries and archives. My pronunciation of this acronym is BIPOC. If you want to learn more about this acronym, I would encourage you to go to the website on the slide, the BIPOCproject.org. My use of this acronym connects strongly to this solidarity principle on their website. I quote, "To uplift Native and Black humanity, honor the legacies of Native and Black resistance to colonization and white supremacy, and actively examine how disparities and injustices uniquely affect Native and Black communities." Before I move into what I'm here to talk about with you, I'd like to offer gratitude and acknowledgement to those who helped me get here today and to those who taught me things I'm incorporating into my presentation. Starting with Courtney Moma, Aaliyah Reich, Patricia Patterson, and the 2020 DigiPres Planning Committee. Thank you for your thoughtfully written request to have me speak and your equally thoughtful planning. To Heather Slania, my library's director, for her continued support and for always reading my abstracts and letting me run through presentations during our one-on-ones. To Cristina Fontanes Rodriguez, who I came to know as my library's NDSR resident, for helping me expand my managerial skills and teaching me as much, if not more than, what I hope she learned in this position. And to my friend Sophia Leung for bibliographic suggestions. I want to acknowledge the work of Carl Blumenthal, Peggy Greisinger, Julia Y. Kim, Shira Peltzman, and Vicki Steves on the article, "What's Wrong with Digital Stewardship? Evaluating the Organization of Digital Preservation Programs from Practitioners' Perspectives" in the Journal of Contemporary Archival Studies. Their article spoke to my experience in this area and is an important piece of scholarship within this field. I'll be referring to it throughout this presentation, so thank you to them. I also want to acknowledge this book by Ruha Benjamin called Race After Technology, which I refer to as well throughout this presentation, in addition to Ramesh Srinivasan's Whose Global Village? Rethinking How Technology Shapes Our World. So the flow for today, what I'm here to talk with you about, we'll start with a journey to digital stewardship, the pipeline myth, race and the tools we're using and building, leadership and local accountability for a national and global impact. At the heart of all of this, and almost all public speaking I do and publications I write, is people. The people who do this work, as well as a critique of the situations, environments, and systems in which we do this work from my experience as a woman of color in this profession. As I started to prepare for this talk, I was grateful for this quote from Ramesh Srinivasan, as a method of centering myself and my identity into this work. Srinivasan writes, "No definition of technology should be limited solely to digital media. Communities across the world, past and present, have always developed and crafted innovative tools, systems, and networks that shape social and cultural life." I'd like to ask you all to hold this thought throughout my presentation. I'll leave it up for just a few more seconds so folks have a chance to read through it once or twice on your own. Thank you. So, the beginning of my digital stewardship journey starts around 2013 when I was chosen as one of the Association for Research Libraries Career Enhancement Program Fellows, designed specifically for students of racial and ethnic minority groups who are enrolled in master's programs for library and information science. I fulfilled my fellowship residency at Columbia University Library's Humanities and History Division. It was the summer between my two academic years spent at Pratt Institute School of Information, where I was concentrating in digital humanities. Columbia was my first experience with digital humanities in a workplace setting. Before I started my fellowship in June of that year, I found myself impressed with a valuable tool that is not often spoken about in library and information science programs, the press release. What is now a 404 error page, this press release from February 2013 states that just the year before it was written, this division initiated a 2-year training program for liaison librarians and other professional staff to acquire new skills and methodologies to support the digital humanities. The press release went on to say that my digitization experience will lend itself to the geospatial component of this project and the division digitizes the library's historic maps. Having come from a position at a historical society that had a museum and library, where I curated an exhibition just before leaving graduate school in 2012, I had the opportunity to work with the press and press releases, but a photography exhibition about Baltimore and Maryland's civil rights era by Paul Henderson, who was an Afro-American newspaper photographer, deserves press. It was not until this moment that I realized the power of this type of announcement gave to any project. The person who wrote the press release for my upcoming fellowship was specifically placed within the libraries, or at least that's how I remember it. This was remarkable to me in and of itself, but for a couple other reasons as well. It positioned me to not only feel like I was getting something out of this fellowship, extremely valuable experience at a prestigious institution, but also made me feel like I could contribute something to the team. And it named me, it named the people involved with this work. It could be something I could keep and share, which is how I have the screenshot. Both my graduate school experience and my work experience during those 2 years in my graduate program equally shaped my approach to my librarianship practice. With Barbara Rockenbach, who is now Yale's University librarian, as my supervisor, my experience at Columbia in particular was formative. I'll talk more about Barbara's influence on me as a manager and as a leader further into this presentation. When my time came to an end at Columbia, I moved on to a couple other positions, all of which were temporary and only one was unpaid. After my time with humanities and history, that team or community feeling that was really cultivated there continued at Barnard College Archives, where I was a fellow working with Shannon O'Neill and Martha Teeney. The Association of Research Libraries awarded me this fellowship, but they also gave me something equally valuable. They flew everyone in the Career Enhancement Program and those in their initiative to recruit a diverse workforce program to Seattle, where their leadership symposium was taking place. I got to meet a group of library and information science students who all identified as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. We were all smart, brought incredible experience even at this stage in our careers, and were ready to put in the work. It was also mostly a love fest. To be in these rooms where we aren't the minority, where we could share our personal stories and feel familiar was powerful. So why am I telling you all this? Just a couple short years after this incredible experience as an Association Research Libraries Fellow, where I felt not only seen for my identity, but also seen for the skills and experience I bring to this profession, I would co-facilitate a workshop at a library conference on privilege and critical praxis as a way to embody diversity, equity, and inclusion in the profession. Someone raised their hand and made a comment that I'm sure many folks have heard or maybe even thought. That comment was, people of color don't apply for jobs at my institution. This comment, which insinuates there's a lack of qualified candidates to apply for jobs at this particular person's institution, lays the blame for why this institution is not racially diverse on the BIPOC community. It shirks the responsibility of the institution and the historical legacy of racism within the profession conveniently on the marginalized, which brings me to the myth of the pipeline problem. The pipeline problem is a theory there simply aren't enough properly skilled members of underrepresented groups to hire. As Mehul Patel argues in the article, why tech needs to stop blaming the pipeline for its lack of diversity. Without participation and representation in leadership, many minority STEM workers are overlooked. They never receive the mentorship, sponsorship, and guidance needed to advance their careers. Mentorship, sponsorship, and guidance would also help this profession's retention of BIPOC workers. Retention not getting as much attention as percentages of demographics might is actually something that I really hope becomes part of a larger conversation. As reported in this Afrotech article, Facebook was scrutinized for its explanation about its diversity issue when their global head of diversity blamed the public education system. In September of that year, the CEO of Wells Fargo made headlines when he laid the blame on the pipeline in a much more direct way, saying the company's lack of diversity is due to, quote, a limited pool of Black talent to recruit from, end quote. As a company that has been exposed for discriminatory behavior in subprime mortgage lending, it's much easier to shift blame than to face any type of internal critique. According to the Kaufman Fellow report, Black professionals who hold master's degrees has increased 133%, and Latinx folks with master's degrees has increased to 400% from 1980 to 2016. According to Afrotech, although the number of Black and Latinx students are growing, the number of tech jobs held by both demographics are not keeping pace. The tech and banking industries may have more of a public spotlight for comments about the pipeline myth, but library and information science professions also suffer from this lack of accountability. What would our news headline look like as a profession? How about your headline as an institution or a department? What does your internal critique look like and who's documenting it? Whose voices are being heard or consulted within that critique? Some further questions on recruitment and hiring could include, where are your jobs being posted? Are you encouraging internal applications and considering promotions? Are you paying enough commensurate to the experience you're requiring? Are you requiring an uneven amount of experience for the position? What are your values for each position you're trying to fill? As I mentioned in my opening, in my publication and public speaking activities, I try to focus on practitioners doing the work and critiquing the systems we utilize to achieve this work, which begs the question, who is doing digital stewardship in our institutions? How are they being recruited, hired, mentored, promoted, managed, and retained? To explore this, I went to two sources: the NDSA results of the 2017 Digital Preservation Staff Survey Report, and the Blumenthal, Greisinger, Kim, Peltzman, Steves article I mentioned earlier, titled What's Wrong with Digital Stewardship? Evaluating the Organization of Digital Preservation Programs from Practitioners' Perspectives. The goal of the latter was to, quote, better understand the increasing dissatisfaction expressed by respondents to the NDSA staffing surveys about how their work is organized at their respective institutions, end quote. The former, the NDSA report, let us know the majority of the folks who responded to the survey are from academic libraries or archives at 46%, and that digital preservation work at their institutions are mostly taking place within a library or archive at 69.1%. The majority of the work is being done in-house, but the majority of it is not done within designated digital preservation department within a designated digital preservation department at their organization at 58.6%. Ideal staffing for this work is far off from reality. 46% of respondents indicated a negative view of their current organization as it relates to the digital preservation program. Only 25% indicated they were pleased in this area. Most of the staff doing this work are retrained existing staff at 68%. Unlike the NDSA report, Blumenthal, Greisinger, Kim, Peltzman, and Steve's study provided demographic information. 76.2% of respondents self-reported as white, and 66.7% self-reported their gender as female. This participant group is very similar to the demographics we've seen reported by the American Libraries Association when it comes to who is working in our libraries. Blumenthal, Greisinger, Kim, Peltzman, and Steves also reported on age range and years of experience within the field. the majority being between 30 to 39 years old and 43% having 5 to 10 years professional experience. As we all know, the largest percentage of people who hold positions within libraries and archives identify as white women. The profession is overwhelmingly white, but it's important to note that this is historical and by design, as the profession and the buildings themselves were once closed to people who were not white, criminalizing by POC, like the Tougaloo Nine, a group of 9 African Americans who in 1961 entered a whites-only public library in order to demonstrate and achieve desegregation. They were subsequently arrested. In addition to being overwhelmingly white, the profession also has a homogeneous issue. People of similar class and educational backgrounds who went to the same few programs and did the same types of unpaid internships fill these positions. There's a significant barrier to entry into these professions. Master's programs are costly, paid experience is hard to come by, especially when you're a student, and permanent jobs are few. On top of not being racially diverse or inclusive of marginalized communities and being fairly homogeneous, there are other ways, being fairly homogeneous, there are other ways structural racism and inequities can impact us, yet not much attention is being given to these structures. For example, how does the technology we use, particularly in digital stewardship, impact us? Does it matter who's making these technologies? It's no secret that our institutions were built around white cultural norms, but so too were the technologies we use to do this work, which brings me to the race and tools we're using in building section. In her book, Race After Technology, Ruha Benjamin writes that, quote, in examining how different forms of coded inequity take shape, this text presents a case for understanding race itself as a kind of tool, one designed to stratify and sanctify social justice as part of the architecture of everyday life. The effects of the tech industry's homogeneity has led to countless articles and analyses, but are these effects taken into account when digital preservation programs are built and staffed? In the same book, Ruha Benjamin writes about our assumptions that machines are neutral, but there is cultural coding embedded in the technical coding of software, despite their design to appear neutral. For example, Benjamin discusses the Netflix movie recommendations that entice Black viewers by using tailored movie posters of Black cast members. Benjamin writes, and I quote, why bother with broader structural changes in casting and media representation when marketing gurus can make Black actors appear more visible than they really are in the actual film, end quote. We see these biases perpetuated in the hiring practices of our institutions, including those programs and apps meant to aid this process. Using social codes, such as names to deny interviews, callbacks, etc., and HR departments not sending hiring committees applications because they don't meet the minimum years of experience are just some examples. So let's do a quick recap. If we're starting from a place where staff have the same or very similar background, we're using technology that was made by people of the same or similar background, that's hiding, fixing, or deepening discrimination. How we're producing our work may be furthering discriminatory design, discovery, and access to information. You might remember when Google Arts and Culture released a new selfie matching feature of their app in 2018, where one would take a selfie and see which artwork matched your features. As Catherine Shu's article for TechCrunch put it, the app may have shown us how technology can make art more engaging, but clearly illustrated art's historic biases when people of color found their results as limited to those in servitude and exoticized figures. The collections the app was pulling from were clearly from American and European institutions. To quote Rama Srinivasan once more, it is, and I quote, it is troubling today that we blindly embrace technologies that are constituted by databases, classification systems, and algorithms that remain opaque and invisible. They merely sort through the information that has already been created rather than assisting the process of creating, communicating, or reflecting. So which brings me to my next section on local accountability and leadership. Going back to my time as an ARL fellow, I want to dissect what was actually happening to introduce this section. The chronology of my time at Columbia actually started well before I began my fellowship. And I like to think a bit of it as having happened in 4 stages. So stage 1 is I had a meeting with one of my professors my first year at Pratt, where she learned my racial and ethnic background. She encouraged me to apply for the fellowship, which I had never heard of until that moment. She might not have thought about it this way, but she was an active participant in my recruitment and retention in the field. This might seem confusing because I was already in a master's program for library and information science, but the recruitment and retention process is much longer than just getting folks interested in library school or in a program. There was certainly a power dynamic because she was my professor, but she was not my boss. She gave me time because she made a point to give me time and to share this information. Stage 2 was on me, to write an application that illustrated why I would be a good candidate for this fellowship, and then later the work would be on me to follow through on those points. I honestly probably didn't ask anyone to read my application, but I should have if I didn't. Stage 3 was carried out by the Association of Research Libraries. They flew everyone who was chosen for the fellowship out to Seattle, as I mentioned earlier, during their leadership symposium, and held what was essentially personal training sessions where we learned about ourselves and about the systems in which we're working. They helped us build community among people in these fellowships and residency programs, all of whom would be our colleagues, and allowed us to socialize with people of similar backgrounds, as well as some of the administrators and leaders of research libraries across the country.
The 4th stage might get the biggest spotlight, but is only possible because of the other 3 stages. I was paid for my employment at Columbia, I was mentored by Barbara, and I gained firsthand experience that I could build on in my career. What was not clear to me when I was in the moment was how many people in these 4 stages stepped up and took leadership roles that are outside the traditional roles we turn to for this type of care, encouragement, and acknowledgement of one's value. Going back to my experience under Barbara Rockenbach's supervision at Columbia, her approach to a student fellow who would only be with her team for a summer was intentional, aware, and community-driven. A lot of people who fill temporary positions feel out of place, and the same could be said for students who work with credentialed professionals. As someone who took 6 years off in between undergrad and graduate school, and who had been working in libraries, museums, and archives for even longer than that period of time, I definitely had jobs where people made assumptions about my experience level because I was a student. I never felt out of place under Barbara's supervision, and I will say under her care. I always felt like part of her team. And don't misconstrue the word care for a parent-child relationship. I use that word deliberately because that's exactly what's needed in leadership and should not be viewed as female-oriented, but gender-neutral. We assign things like care in the workplace to women because we work within patriarchal environments where power is rooted in dominance and authority. Management and leadership styles in some ways are developed through emulation. As humans, we sometimes normalize bad behaviors as a means to justify why something has happened to us and then repeat those bad behaviors. Our cultural/workplace norms are generally not discussed, but rather developed and realized through experience. We'll be sure to have a code of conduct passed around at conferences and webinars, but when it comes to developing a code of conduct or cultural norms within the workplace, either they aren't codified or have no meaning because those in leadership positions are not leading by example. Considering the theme of this conference is Get Active with Digital Preservation, I'm going to give my answer to the question that serves as the main title for the Blumenthal, Greisinger, Kim, Peltzman, and Steve study, What's Wrong with Digital Preservation? My answer is leadership. We need leaders to help diversify our staff, not referring to the myth of the pipeline. We need leaders to take into consideration what kinds of technology we're utilizing and how it might be furthering discrimination by using them. Do you remember the NDSA report figure of 46% of respondents indicated a negative view of their current organization as it relates to the digital preservation program? We need leaders to change that. And I want to preface this next part by saying a couple things. There's no one size fits all to management and leadership. So I won't have all the answers or the answers that are right for your community, your team. As we saw from my community-driven retention diagram, there is a need to expand our definition of leadership and with that, recognize power dynamics, even if you aren't a people manager. While some of the actionable points I'm mentioning here are strategies I've used or implemented, they were not only done as I learned more about my team's needs, but they are ongoing work. This is in no way implying I'm done figuring all of this out, because there is no done. Some of these points are takeaways from my personal experience as a team member, then manager and mentor, and some of these findings are reflected in the scholarship of the profession. And here I'll continue to refer to the Blumenthal, Greisinger, Kim, Peltzman, Steve study. So first, let's talk about what you're hiring for and what your values are. When my library was awarded a grant to host a National Digital Stewardship Art Program resident, Heather Slania, my library's director, whom I mentioned in the opening, and I hired for this one-year position. As NDSR Art describes on their website, this model of NDSR addresses issues of digital preservation and stewardship in relation to the arts, with a particular focus on new media and arts information. We also wrote the application, which had typical grant narratives like the project overview, our history, and what we're looking for in a candidate. The person in the position was to focus their work in researching how to preserve and provide access to non-traditional graduate theses. The previous administration at my library had made a requirement for all graduate students submitting a thesis to provide the library with a PDFA file, and treated the media outside of this document file as supplemental, when supplemental media is oftentimes the actual work at MICA. We could not keep archiving digital objects as if they are written texts. Research of what other institutions were doing with similar assets, focus groups with MICA faculty and staff, and students, reporting on best practices for preservation and access, and workflow proposals were key components of this area of our digital preservation program. When hiring, I immediately thought about my experience with Barbara when it came time to present our project to the NDSR team. We laid out what we wanted to see in a resident, but also why someone would want to work at MICA and what I would do specifically to ensure this person felt like part of our team. Employment should be mutually beneficial, which I'll get back to. In the forefront of my mind, I was taking into consideration the fact that this position was temporary, therefore how we hire needed to adjust accordingly. We had to pay close attention to the people who are completely capable of succeeding in this position, but also who might need this as a springboard for their career. We had to align our values for this position, not simply looking at whether or not someone matched the exact credentials we were seeking. During the NDSR art orientation, where hosts and residents met for the first time, we went through a few training modules and everyone set SMART goals for themselves. Hosts and residents alike did this activity. The acronym for SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable or attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Everyone in my library had been using SMART goals to assess what they'd like to achieve in their work, and then subsequently to have reviews with their managers once a year. So this was a perfect fit with how we were already working. However, the success of this type of assessment completely depends on the manager. It's on the manager to either be flexible with the goals their team want to achieve, or it is on them to help them write flexibility into their goals. Too often when temporary positions are filled, it is the temporary employee who is assessed, not the manager or team they are working with. We see this, for example, in diversity residencies. So how will you assess your role and your team's success? This is a way to hold yourself accountable and for your team as well. To address the employment should be mutually beneficial point, before Christina started and during her residency, I did a few things to help achieve this. I ordered business cards far in advance so that they would be ready for her when she began. Her office space, including her phone extension and computer, were set up and ready for her. That might seem very basic, but I've worked jobs where I've had no place of my own, no place for my work. We worked with strategic communications to have a press release written about the grant and Christina's work. We also announced her arrival and departure on our social media programs. Christina's first day, we went out as a team for breakfast. Christina's first week, we probably had our longest meeting. We mapped out the deliverables we had written into the grant. then created sub-goals and due dates for those sub-goals, which of course were flexible and definitely changed throughout the course of her being with us. We wrote these goals into the project management tool our team was using at the time. I arranged for a photographer at our institution to photograph her so that she could use the images as a professional headshot. This was something I learned from the Association of Research Libraries. Everyone in Seattle during that time was offered free headshots. Everyone in my area, the Digital Initiatives Unit, had the option to work from home when they needed it before COVID-19 happened. I had written up guidelines on expectations for the workday, should they be working from home, and got it approved by our director well before Christina started, and we would offer her the same opportunity if she needed it. One of our top priorities was to make Christina's research publicly available. Because of this, we created a new page on our website called Projects and Publications, where all of her reports are available and actually serves as the place to drop all of our public reports across the library. Christina and I mutually decided on having bi-weekly check-ins that wouldn't last more than 30 minutes unless needed. We had monthly team meetings already, but I hadn't implemented the individual check-in with each team member prior to Christina's arrival. One of the reasons for this is because my team stays on top with their work and we communicate regularly via Slack. However, this experience showed me that the check-ins don't have to be solely about work. This is an opportunity to have my one-on-one attention about anything. Lastly, a year or so after I started in my position, I began budgeting and planning for team retreats to happen on an annual basis, specifically for strategic planning. Half the full day of a retreat is spent planning goals for the long term and short term, and half the day is spent doing low-key team building activities, and meals are provided. Which takes us to our second point: make agency and empowerment a top goal for all. This section connects directly with one of Blumenthal, Greisinger, Kim, Peltzman, and Steve's findings. Finding number 5, quote, digital stewards, autonomy without authority, end quote. From that study, I'll quote, one of the most common challenges participants described was their lack of policy and decision-making authority to carry out the stewardship initiatives they had been hired to implement, end quote. A crucial part of my good experience at Columbia University was Barbara's ability to give me agency in my projects while also guiding me to success. For Christina's position as NDSR resident, she had a professional development budget and could pick and choose however she wanted to spend it. Conferences, trainings, whatever she felt like would serve her in her current role or future roles was something I trusted her to figure out. I would make suggestions or read applications that she had written, but ultimately what she applied for was her decision. I applied for the Digital Library Federation's Museums Cohort Membership Grant. We were awarded a free membership to DLF while Christina was with us, which meant we could attend the forum in Nevada. Considering I had attended the conference just the year before, I offered it to Christina. In my abstract for this talk, I wrote, leaders might plot our route, steer the ship when conditions are bad, but should stand back once we're in good sailing conditions. I feel strongly about this when it comes to decision-making in the workplace. If we've hired you, that means we've entered into a social contract to provide any authority within the area you're working in. Agency to make change based on research and demonstrated need is important for the retention of the worker, not just at your institution, but generally. Trust is crucial to the next point, building a critical culture, which makes a safe space for all. One of the participants of the Blumenthal, Greisinger, Kim, Peltzman, Steve study spoke to finding number 7, which reads, quote, these cultures maintain discriminatory systems of privilege, end quote. The participant talked about, quote, the additional labor of earning trust to perform their role in this culture, end quote. This person was identified as an early career practitioner of color in an academic library. This person may have experienced this implicit or explicit bias based on their race or ethnicity, age, gender, or all of the above, as this is something that I personally experienced as well. Earlier this year, I published an article called Building a Critical Culture, How Critical Librarianship Falls Short in the Workplace for Communications and Information Literacy. While most of the article addresses the performativity of critical librarianship, it also addresses the need for an examination of workplace culture within the LIS field, regardless of whether or not one identifies as a critical librarian. LIS field standing for Library and Information Sciences field. An area I focus on as a way to begin building a critical culture is management and leadership. Years of experience does not make someone a good manager, and neither does wanting to be regarded as a good manager. Just like anything else, it takes ongoing work, which includes reading about the topic, reflection, assessment, and subsequent action, dialogue with other managers, and more. Christina was joining the digital initiatives team as someone who had skills, knowledge, and experience before joining us. Not only that, but as someone who was completely capable of learning and teaching. As a team, we all had to be open and vulnerable to learning new things, just as the Developing Librarian program at Columbia University was designed around. If building a critical culture in the workplace was a goal, the workplace becomes a safer space for everyone, not just those from marginalized communities. Furthermore, diversity, equity, inclusion efforts will become less performative because they are built into the culture. Finally, the fourth point I'd like for folks in attendance and beyond to think about is securing and advocating for permanent funding for digital preservation positions and work. In the third finding of Blumenthal, Greisinger, Kim, Peltzman, and Steve's study, they write, quote, digital preservation is a maintenance-heavy undertaking that does not necessarily lend itself to the types of bureaucratic performance indicators which often sway decision-making and funding opportunities, end quote. Grants are a great way to achieve work that wouldn't otherwise be achievable. Christina's research was a crucial part of our digital preservation program. While she was someone I would have wanted to hire full-time, we are an extremely small library with 4 full-time positions and 1 part-time position at a college that has around 2,000 students in full-time enrollment. Adding an additional full-time position just wasn't possible at the end of Christina's residency. So what does someone like me do in this situation? One possibility is to shift priorities on my existing team. Presentations to various administrative and faculty committees were happening throughout the NDSR art residency, making a case for the long-term commitment of this work. So how are you working sustainability into your funding on the environmental level, program level, and people level? In our information literacy classes, we teach our students to think critically during the research process. We ask them to think about what is included in a source, but also what is missing. If we turn this lens on the work we do, the work that is prioritized, the work that is funded, again, taking into account who is doing the work, the tools being used to do this work, and what we're determining is worthy or of value for long-term preservation. Would you share this list publicly without hesitation? If Google Arts and Culture took into consideration the types of collections they have access to on their platform for the facial matching app, or if they had people on staff or as testers that were from diverse backgrounds, their app might not have been reported as having a race problem. As I said in my abstract, local accountability is what is needed, but how do you hold your administration accountable when you have no agency, authority, or your position is temporary? It is then on you as colleagues to hold other colleagues accountable. When reports and scholarships such as the NDSA report I mentioned during this presentation, as well as the Blumenthal, Greisinger, Kim, Peltzman, and Steve study are released, they should be addressed by the digital preservation community at the local, national, and global level. I'll close out with this beautiful quote, again from Ruha Benjamin's book, Race After Technology. Reality is something we create together, except that so few people have a genuine say in the world in which they are forced to live. Amid so much suffering and injustice, we cannot resign ourselves to this reality we have inherited. It is time to reimagine what is possible, so let's get to work. For those joining live, I look forward to questions and an exchange of ideas and experiences on the conference Slack project. Thank you.